So welcome back to the Speak.
Yep, another exciting episode.
It's been a week, and
It's been a week.
I hope you enjoyed the last video. You see some comments?
I did, but unfortunately, I didn't. Usually, I bring the quotes with me, and I didn't bring them this time. So I honestly don't remember what they were about. I don't know what to do. Now I feel bad because it's the first time I've done this.
No worries. We can always respond to them if they make a response some other time later. But otherwise...
They get a couple comments.
Okay, but from one person? Because I saw like two from one person.
Yeah, from one person.
Oh,
Who regularly comments on our videos.
Oh, okay. So yeah, pretty much the last time we talked about what I do, and since you're talking about your work, I guess it's the right way to, transition into what you do.
Yes, what do I do? Yeah, that's right.
So, what is it that you do, and why is it that you do what you do?
Why is it that I do what I do? Well, I said two different but very interesting questions. What I do and why I do it. I mean, why I do it, of course, is to make money, but why did I get into this?
Exactly.
Yeah, that would be a more interesting question. So what I do is I assess and evaluate the effectiveness of education programs that are based in math, engineering, science, and technology that are funded by U.S. government agencies, like, for example, the National Science Foundation. So when somebody gets a grant to fund an education program related somehow to mathematics, engineering, science, or technology, they need to subcontract with somebody who's external to the project, who will assess and evaluate the effectiveness of their program, to look at what they're doing, to look at their goals, and to see if what they are actually doing lines up with what they said they would do, and also to look at how well they are actually doing it. And my job is to be independent of projects, so that I look at this as an external evaluator. Because if you have somebody internally to the project, their bias is going to cause them to see things more favorably than maybe they should.
Okay.
So I'm coming as an external evaluator to look at things more objectively.
So, okay, it's an interesting one. So what's the title for like me, I'm a psychologist, and what are you?
I'm what's called an evaluator.
Evaluator.
That's the title, yeah.
So how does one become an evaluator?
I stumbled across it accidentally. I came across it accidentally. So I originally got my first bachelor's degree in communications back in 1990, and I got that from Cornerstone University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was planning on going into radio, and in fact I was a disc jockey from 1990 until 1992 at a station in Grand Rapids called WBYW-FM, where they said, "We bring you the world." And it was an eclectic radio station. They had all kinds of variety of music, but I was on that station for about 3 years. But then learned the hard way that you can't make any money in radio.
Oh, really?
You can't make any money in radio. And not only that, well, unless you're a rare person who develops a personality. And another thing that happens is there's no stability in radio. So what happens is, if you work at a particular radio station, let's say you work at a rock station, and then the people who own the station think, okay, rock's not making us enough money, let's switch to hip-hop. So what they do is they fire everybody and bring in all new people to create a hip-hop station. Let's say you're working at the hip-hop station, and then he said, hey, we want to do a country and western station because maybe there's more money in country and western. Then they're going to fire everybody again and hire a whole new staff that are skilled in running in DJing a country and western station.
But I thought DJs are like eclectic or something.
No, I mean they are. But typically what happens though is when a station wants to rebrand, they typically fire everybody and start over fresh. At least I don't know if that's the way they do it now, but that's the way they did it back in the 1990s when I was in radio. So this was over 30 years ago.
Because the DJs I know, most of them are very eclectic. They can play all kind of music and
Right, but do you have the situation happening in Uganda where stations are... To me, it seems like there's not much variety. in the radio stations here that they're all pretty much playing the same thing. Maybe that's not true. But in America, what you have is you have
Specialized.
Yeah, they're all specialized radio stations. So you turn through the dial and you've got a rock station, you've got a pop station, you got a hip hop station, you've got different kinds of rock stations, you've got a classic rock station, you've got an alternative rock station, you've got a Christian rock station. I could go on and on with this. You can have a reggae station, you can have an eclectic station, you've got public radio, which is like, you've got news stations. You know,
but our stations have everything.
Yeah, they don't know. In America, it is not everything. It is not everything. It is very specialized. So you go to the station that plays what you want to hear.
Oh, great.
If you want to hear classic rock, you go to the classic rock station. If you want to hear country and western music, you go to the country and western station. You know, if you want hip hop, you go to the hip hop station.
Okay, so then, how did you transition from the radio into?
So, upon realizing that I wasn't going to make any money in radio, I decided to go back to school for a second degree. As a child, I had decided that I wanted to be a meteorologist because I love the weather. And of course, meteorology is the study of atmospheric phenomena like snow, rain, fog, all that stuff. And that's what I wanted to do when I was a child, but for some reason I didn't pursue that. So I said, okay, radio didn't work out for me. Why don't I go back to my childhood dream of being a meteorologist? So I went back to school, got a meteorology degree, worked 2 internships at 2 different National Weather Service offices for 2 years, found that I was terrible at it. So I am a lousy weather forecaster. I don't know how people do it, but I just got overwhelmed with all the maps and all the analysis because I'm not a visual person. And I'm like, oh no, I blew it again. Okay, radio didn't work for me. Meteorology's not going to work for me because I've been doing this for 2 years and I stink at it. So now what do I do? Well, there was a particular professor, a meteorology professor, at the university I went to at the time, which was Central Michigan University, which is where I got my meteorology degree. I sat down with him and I said, well, what do you think I should do? This isn't working for me. He says, I think you should go to graduate school. Way back when I was working on my first degree at Cornerstone, which is a communications degree, I worked with another professor at the time to do an independent study for a communications class, but it was like a philosophy of communications thing. And I had to do scholarly research and write a scholarly paper. He told me the same thing. I think that you should go on to graduate school. So I went on to graduate school, got my master's degree.
In what?
In geography. So that was in geography, but I focused on climatology. So I did my master's thesis on, what I did was the geography department at Western Michigan University, which is where I got my master's degree, had a weather station just outside of the city of Kalamazoo, which is where the university was at, Kalamazoo, Michigan. And they had data for 20 years. So I was able to analyze that data and write a paper and publish it in a scholarly journal. And what was interesting is I actually made an influential discovery that was groundbreaking, was something that people were unaware of, and actually influenced other researchers to see if they could find this pattern in other areas in Michigan, in other areas of the Great Lakes region. And my paper was actually cited several times for this. And basically what I found is in Michigan we have something called lake effect snow. So one of the things I tried to do was to look at how the lake, to see if I could find any unusual patterns in the data, and to figure out whether those unusual patterns, and by unusual I mean they're different from what you see elsewhere in the United States. And so if I saw something different, that could be evidence that the lake is causing that pattern. And one of the things that I found was that during the winter time, there was a dramatic increase in snowfall that occurred in the last 2 to 4 hours before the sun came up. So let's say the sun comes up at 8 a.m., but between 4 and 8 a.m., it snows a considerable amount more than it did at other times. 4 to 8 a.m. is the time when the air temperature is the coldest. That is when you have the greatest contrast in temperature between the lake temperature and the air temperature, because the lake is not frozen. So it's a little above freezing, so maybe 3-4 degrees Celsius. And this cold air is crossing this lake, which the surface temperature doesn't change all that much. But what happens is, the colder the air is, the more the instability you're going to have over that lake. So if the air is 5 degrees colder than the lake, you have some instability, but if it's 10 degrees colder than the lake, you have a lot more instability. That will increase the snowfall. So I hypothesized that this dramatic increase in snowfall was being caused by the fact that that's when the air temperatures were coldest, and so that's when you had the greatest contrast between the air temperature and the lake temperature, so you had the greatest instability at that time. So that's why you're having tremendous amounts of snow that were occurring at that time. So my discovery was actually a groundbreaking discovery.
Okay,
it is my one and only major contribution to science.
So how have you benefited from that?
I haven't. It's just the satisfaction of knowing that I discovered something.
So moving on from there, what happened?
So what happened after that? So after getting my master's degree, after 2 years, so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I have a master's degree now. What do you do with a master's degree in geography focused on climatology? Nothing except teach. Teach and do research. Where am I going to do research? I have to do research at a university, so that means I have to get a PhD. So I'm realizing, okay, I can't stop here. Now, there was a professor at Western Michigan University. His name was Dave Rudge. He was in the Madison Institute for Science Education. And he was talking to me and invited me, and I don't remember why he did, I don't know how it happened, but he invited me to sit in on one of his classes because he was wondering if I would be interested in entering into their PhD program in science education. I started attending his classes, exploring all these different concepts and ideas, related to pedagogy and the nature of science and so forth. What is the nature of science and what is the most effective way to teach it? Traditional kind of approaches of memorization versus constructivist or inquiry-based approaches, where students take more of an active role in their learning. They take more responsibility in their learning. What are some of the best approaches for students to actually learn? And I got so caught up in this, I was fascinated by it. I got accepted into the program. I didn't want to leave the state of Michigan because I love Michigan. I'd been in Michigan my whole life. And here's the thing, I was the type of person at that time, I didn't like to go far from home, which is why it's so radical now that I married a Ugandan woman and I'm living in Uganda halfway around the world.
I know.
Because it was a time in my life where I wouldn't even leave the state of Michigan. I spent the first 58 years of my life of not venturing beyond more than 50 or 60 miles from where I originally was born. Well, I'm trying to think, maybe it was more than that, because I'm trying, how long was it to Mount Pleasant?
Okay.
I'm estimating, maybe a little more than that.
We're looking at concepts like separation anxiety. People they have an anxiety that develops when they separate from people that they're used to. They don't want to go very far away.
Yeah.
Would you say that's something that you had?
I would say that. I would say I grew up in a very close family. I did all close friendships. I developed strong attachments to people, and I didn't want to go far from those roots. I didn't want to go far from my family. I have a very close relationship with my mom, for example. My dad has passed. He's no longer here. He died. He died about he died in 2003. I also lost my sister in 1998, which was the darkest day of my life. Very devastating day, because I'm very close to everyone in my family. Which is actually why it's so interesting that I, falling in love will do crazy things. It'll change everything.
I'm wondering, with that kind of anxiety about living in space, when was the first time you actually moved out of that space?
When I came here to Uganda. Now, I lived in Kalamazoo for 25 years because I got my master's degree there for those 2 years, worked on my PhD for 6.5. And so while I was doing that, they threw me into teaching. So I don't know what happens next. Did you start to ask something else?
They can tell me.
Yeah. Okay. So because I was working on my PhD in a science education program, the way that they funded me was through giving me a teaching assistantship. So I taught classes that I taught earth science and atmospheric science classes that were designed for future teachers. So people who were going to go and become teachers of elementary or higher grade students, the primary grades and the secondary grades. And so I taught them that content that they would eventually need to teach their students. And I did that for 8 years. So actually I didn't do it for 8 years. I did that for the 6.5 years that I was working on my PhD. But while I was working on my master's degree, I taught also. When I was working on my master's, I just taught basic physical geography courses. And I taught these introductory kind of courses, physical geography. And so I taught for 8 years while I was working on my master's degree and PhD. So I got plenty of teaching experience. So I got to the end of my PhD and then graduated in December of 2006. But in May of 2006, the Mallinson Institute for Science Education decided that they weren't going to fund me anymore because I'd been there too long. They wanted to give the money to newer students, so they cut me off. So a professor hired me to do some research for her over the summer, so that sustained me over the summer. But then that job ended, and suddenly I'm out of a job. But because they don't really pay you much in these jobs that they have students teach, I was living paycheck to paycheck, so I had no money saved. So I get to August of 2006, I have no money. I'm pretty much broke. I actually have a little bit. I have $200 in the bank. It's about what, 800,000 shillings, something like that. Close to 800, a little less than 800,000 shillings. That's all I have in the bank. But the problem is, they also took away my computer, because one of the benefits of having a teaching assistantship was they gave you a free computer. But they took it away because they took away all my benefits. But they said you still have to finish your last semester. You just have to figure out how to pay for it. So I had to buy a new computer. So I threw it on my credit card because it cost more than $200 to buy a new computer. So then suddenly now I've got $200, but now I've got whatever I had to pay. I don't know, it was like $800 to buy this new laptop or whatever it was on my credit card. But then I had to pay for tuition, which I don't know if you know anything about American tuition, but it's outlandish.
It's too much.
Yeah, it was a lot. So suddenly I had to put that on my credit card too. But I still had to find a place to live. So here's the thing, I've got no job. Here's another thing that's interesting. My apartment was condemned.
So they
said August 2006, I had to be out of my apartment. They gave me a date. And then they ended up tearing all those apartments down because they were just there. And I knew I lived in those apartments for years, and they were terrible places to live. But if you were poor and didn't have a lot of money, it was good enough, you know. So I was a poor graduate student living paycheck to paycheck. It was all I could afford. I have no place to live. I have no job. I have all this debt on my credit card. I'm moving forward like something's going to happen, you know, because I'm a Christian.
Hopeful.
God's going to provide. I don't know how. In about July, I told somebody that I was working with, that I had worked with, that somebody else was teaching some of the same classes I taught. I said, well, you know, Madison just cut my funding. I have no job. And she said, well, you know what? We're looking for somebody over at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. She also taught over there. Go talk to, so I wrote that. She wrote, okay, this is his name. Give him a call. Tell him that I recommended you. Drop my name. I called him on the phone. He didn't interview me. He didn't do it. He hired me on the spot. So he hired me on the spot. Next thing you know, I'm going to orientation for teaching, you know, because all the new professors have to go through this orientation at this community college. I went, and I remember even the guy joking there. He says, you know, some of you I don't recognize, including this guy whom I hired, but I did an interview, and he laughed about it. So now I've got the job. So I've got the way to pay for the computer. I've got the way to pay for my tuition. But then, where am I going to live?
I know.
So a friend of mine from church at the time heard that I was looking for a place to live. He says, you know, I have a house, and I have a room upstairs. I have an attic upstairs. There's nothing in it. I don't use it for anything. If you were looking for a place to live, I'll charge you $50 a month, and you can just stay up there. $50 a month? Really? So sure. Now I got a place to live. It's 20 minutes away from the community college. So, you know,
20 minutes drive walk.
20 minutes drive.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I had a car. You know. I've always had a car. I got my first car when I was 17, was it 17 or 18? I got my first car when I was 18 years old. And I mean, usually when I was younger, I always bought used cars that were very old, but they were good enough. You know, the older cars, they seem to be better. You know, the newer ones they make now, you know, they break down so easily, and then it's so expensive to repair them. So yeah, I had a car, and so I had a place to live. I had the money to pay for my computer and for my tuition, and I had a job. So now I got a direction because okay, I'm in this community college now. I have this degree. I've got teaching experience. I've got a teaching job. I can expand. Maybe they'll hire me, bring me on, teach more classes. And because they brought me on, I was teaching, you know, a few classes, but I was only making like $15,000 a year. It was barely enough to survive. You know, at that time, barely enough to survive. I remember that was the year. It was a real struggle for me because I remember having enough money just barely to get through everything and to buy enough food just so that I wouldn't starve. But I was always hungry. That's the year that I was always hungry because I had enough money to buy enough food to survive, but I didn't have enough money to buy enough food to thrive. And in America, it's kind of, you don't, generally it's not a culture where you ask people to help you because it's pull you up by your own bootstraps, and those kind of, you know, I kind of grew up in that culture. It's not only that it's not really, you don't generally ask people. I kind of felt uncomfortable asking people.
You know, with that kind of money, 10,000, that's around 4 million per month in Uganda. That's very comfortable here.
For here in Uganda, because the cost of living here is 25%.
It's above comfortable.
Yes.
Like it's actually rich.
Right. Right. Because the cost of living here in Uganda is 25% of what it is in the U.S. So I have a budget. I won't say the amount, but it is approximately 25% of what it costs me to live alone as a single person in the U.S. So that's an approximate. So whatever I'm spending here to support me and Sharon, I need 4 times as much when I go to the U.S. just to support me without Sharon. Yes. Yes.
So that's your past, and
yeah.
I'm waiting for the point where you say, okay, now I'm going to move out of my comfort zone.
Right. Well, that's a long ways away yet. Yeah. No, that's a long. Is this story interesting, or is it kind of too much? Is it interesting, or is it kind of boring, or like?
No, it is. It's okay. You can.
Yeah. What we could do is we could break this up into 2 parts, or I could just talk up to the point, break it to Uganda, and then we'll come back and we'll tell part 2 next time.
All right, good.
I think that would be good. Yeah, so what happened was, I taught at KVCC for a year, and then after a year, they decided to let me go. And the reason was because my reviews weren't bad. I looked at my reviews, the students review the students, they weren't that bad, but they were a little average than normal, and I know why, because I tried to use some of the teaching approaches that I was taught during my PhD, which are tougher on students because it helps them to learn, but students don't like that because they want the easy road. So they write me lower reviews because my classes are harder, they don't like harder classes. So I get the worst reviews, which makes me look like a poorer teacher, even though I'm a better teacher, because I'm challenging them more. But the reviews make me look like a poorer teacher, so they let me go. So once again, I have no job. I have no job. So here's a year later, for some reason I decided to go back and to visit everybody that I used to work with in the PhD program, all the professors and so forth. I walked in there to say hi to everybody, just kind of give them an update of what's going on, And I ran into Cynthia, who worked for SAMPE, Science and Mathematics Program Improvement, which was a center, an evaluation center that I worked at for 17 years. And the kind of work that I do, I evaluate the effectiveness of education programs in science, technology, engineering, mathematics. That's the work that they did. I told her, well, KVCC decided not to bring me back, I'm out of a job. She said, oh, you know what? We just lost a researcher. She left, went somewhere else. Mark, who's the director, is looking for somebody. He's over in Bernhardt Center, across campus. Go talk to him. He's looking for somebody. I went over. He was just finishing a workshop. Workshop ended. I said, hey, Mark, I hear you're looking for somebody. I'm available. He hired me on the spot.
Again.
Again. This is like, it's one of the reasons why I know there's a God, because I've seen this happen over and over for me. God coming through for me at the last second. He comes through for me at the last possible moment. He doesn't leave me on my own. And then, so now I have a job where I worked at for 17 years. But I'm still not out of my comfort zone. I'm in my comfort zone because I'm still less than 50 miles from where I grew up. And then Sharon hit me. Maybe that's a story for next time, my wife.
Yeah.
And that may be a good place to cut it off for part 2. Hopefully people are kind of caught up in the story and you want to hear, how did I get out of my comfort zone? How did this Michigander for life, so we call people from Michigan, suddenly decide to leave his job? I retired early from my job. To leave his job, travel halfway around the world, and marry a woman in another country and live there. It's been, I'm going on 2 years now.
Yeah, it's quite a journey, and I like that you've been generous with the information about you. I like the thought. For some people, they're very held on to their information, but maybe it's good for the people that are following us to actually appreciate your story and see why we do the things that we do. And I guess next time we shall now talk about what happened.
Yeah.
Why Uganda?
Yeah, why Uganda?
Why
the rest of the story?
Yeah, exactly. So we want to know more about that part, and maybe we shall also get some comments, and we shall respond to those comments and see what next.
Yeah, and hopefully this kind of different approach gets us a different audience. Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you very much for following through, talking about Bobby's life, his career, and generally who he is, and try and appreciate the people who you keep seeing on our program.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye. See you in another 7 days.